everybody's ready. And some of you might want to type. I see some of you having a text box.
Yeah.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, we have another dead computer.
Okay, the charger's right next to him, so it should be good. It's on that table. Desk right there.
Right there.
Yeah.
You see the, oh, you don't have a charger. Does anybody have a charger I may borrow?
Thank you. Okay, so medieval literature. It started 1,000 years from the fall of the Western Roman Empire around the time of 500 AD. You'll always have to remember when I give you timelines like this, it's not like someone sat down and said, okay, today I'm starting medieval literature, right? Like that didn't happen. So scholars base it off of the time in which the text started changing, time started changing, and people started writing. So around 500 AD is the estimated start time for medieval literature. And it lasted through the beginning of the Florentine Renaissance in the late 15th century, so around 1500 AD. Okay, so roughly a 1,000-year time period that, like I said, we're summing up into one Google slide. So pretty hard to do, but we'll do it nonetheless. So medieval literature was composed of both religious writings and secular works. Secular is a word that means worldly or separate from religion. So basically, during the medieval period, people either wrote about religion or they didn't. That was kind of the two different distinctions during the period. You either wrote about God and you wrote about, like religious visions that you might have had, or a lot of people wrote epics, which is that last bullet point, like lengthy narrative poems dealing with heroic deeds. They wrote about knights going off and killing dragons and slaying beasts, and they talked about sorcerers and like witches and warlocks and different things like that. So those were the two distinctions. A lot of the authors that you'll see, most of them stuck to one or the other. They didn't really kind of blend the two together. Most either wrote about religion or they didn't, and that's why today we can kind of categorize it as religious or secular. Latin was the most common language used for medieval writing, but most used their vernacular language. Does anybody know what the word vernacular means? Vernacular means like mother tongue. It's basically the language that you grew up speaking. So whatever your first language is, that's your vernacular. So my vernacular is English, but I'm trying to learn French. So my vernacular would be English, my second language, or my second text would be French. So most of them just wrote in the language that they grew up speaking. Most of the time was Latin, but people like Dante wrote all of his text in Italian. Chaucer kind of did a little bit of both, but most of them wrote in Latin. Okay, so then we have Old English and Middle English. So I'm gonna have you guys pause for a second and look up at this right-hand corner. So, do we see these four lines? They all say the same thing, besides one word. Weirdly enough. So the first one is Old English. That's what, like today, when we're talking about all of these weird texts and when you're looking at these pictures and you have no idea what those words say, that's Old English. Old English is a completely different language than what we speak today, and it's entirely difficult to read. So if you want to go to college, you can actually go to college and study Old English, but it's not something that you can read and really pick up on. And it's that first line, and it says, "Then she went to speak this Old English tongue." So notice, like, old is spelled correctly. This is English, and they spelled it English, and then tonguin was tongue. So weird, the way that it's written, these words kind of are supposed to be up here, but that's how Old English looks. The second line, which is something that is a little bit more easy to read, says, "Then she went to speak this Middle English tongue." So notice, there's a lot of extra letters like English, right, or spaken, but it says the exact same thing. So Middle English is something that you'll see today when we read from the Canterbury Tales. We're not having to read Middle English, I promise. We're reading the modern version, but you'll see kind of the translation in there. Most of what Chaucer wrote was in Middle English. And if you end up taking Brit Lit here with me, it's like a dual credit class, it's an elective, we do read some Middle English, and students always have a fun time with it. Okay, line number 3 says, "Then she went to speak this early modern English tongue." So notice we're dropping a lot of the characters, the letters, or the words like a little bit. more common to us today. And that one is like Shakespeare's language. So you guys have all read Shakespeare. You know how he came up with so many different words, so many different sayings, right? Sentences, fragments, things like that. That's because of line number 3. Line number 3 is Shakespeare. So that's kind of the time that Shakespeare was writing. And then we get to today, then she went to speak this late modern English tongue. So technically what we're speaking today is late modern English. And it looks normal, it's easy to read, and it makes sense. And the last bullet point is a really important one. It talks about the difference between kind of poems and books during this time period. An epic is a lengthy narrative poem dealing with heroic deeds. So Beowulf is a perfect example of an epic. Okay, I want you to shift the way that you think about poems in this class, because poems during the medieval period were totally different. Check out this text right here. See how big it is? This is one poem right here. One poem altogether, the same thing. It's Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene. This, you see at the bottom, is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is one book. So notice the difference, right? Book versus poem. Typically, today, we would think book, poem, right? We think of poems as being short, we think of books as being long. Back in the medieval period, it was opposite, right? They liked to tell stories. They told stories in the form of poetry, and they didn't oftentimes write books like we do today, being especially long with multiple characters. They saved that for poetry. So, prominent authors, we have Geoffrey Chaucer. I always tell students to put a little star next to at least one author because it'll make the test a lot easier later on. So make sure you put a star or highlight Geoffrey Chaucer. That'll be the easiest person for you to remember because he's the author we are reading from today. Margery Kempe is one of our females up there. There were not a lot of female writers during the medieval period. It just didn't happen. Same thing with the Renaissance era. They just weren't really specifically allowed to write, and they didn't have time to do it. So Margery Kempe, thanks to her, we know exactly what life is like for people back in the medieval period, specifically women. She wrote about the daily life of females back then, what they did during the day, how they took care of their husbands, how they had children, what food they ate, what they drank, like what they did for fun. She literally wrote about all of that, and it's thanks to her that we even know what life was like for females back then. We know what it was like for males, right? Because most of these authors up here are males, but we didn't have a lot of insight into the life of a female, but we do now because of Margery Kempe. Sir Thomas Malory and Boethius, they're both poets. Boethius is an interesting one. You guys will hear me say the word visions today. I'll say it a lot. And think of vision and dreams as kind of the same thing. Boethius was put in jail when he was, I think, like 30 years old. Back then, they didn't really live past like 40 or 50. That was kind of the time frame for them, their life expectancy. So during the end of his life, Boethius was put in jail, and he ended up trying to starve himself on like a daily basis in order to evoke these religious visions. Like he wanted God to talk to him in his jail cell, and he thought the only way he could do that was by starving himself. We'll talk about Julian of Norwich in a second. She did the same thing. A lot of people back then did that. So they would either starve themselves, they would go and like fasting, what we do today, they would fast for like multiple days in a row, like kind of to a deadly extent, in order to try and quote unquote trip out and have these weird visions that they thought were sent from God. Whether or not they were, I guess I'll leave that up to your interpretation, but they envisioned that they were. Some of these people, like John Mandeville, he would go and eat like weird berries off of trees and bushes, probably poisonous. But he would definitely do that, and he would have weird visions naturally, which you guys remember the Hunger Games, that happened, yeah, a little bit. Dante Alighieri is one of my favorite authors. He wrote Inferno. That's one of the most popular books by him. If you guys want to check this out, it looks really big, but every semester, without a doubt, I always have a line of students that want to read it because it's so interesting. It's dark. If you can tell from the front cover, it's dark, it's creepy, it's weird. It's a lot shorter than what it looks like. A lot of students see this and they're like, oh my gosh, that looks so long. That looks impossible to read in a semester or trimester, but it's because half of it is in his vernacular language, which is Italian. So in all reality, it's not even half this long, not as half as long as it appears. But it talks about like the circles of hell, and it's basically him and a friend are traveling via boat into hell, and they talk about all of the circles of hell and like what all of the people are doing based on their kind of worldly, I guess, sins, different things like that. Very, very, very interesting. It's hard for me to keep that on my shelf. I actually just got it back yesterday from a student who had it all summer, so it's a really, really good one. And then Thomas Aquinas, he wrote about the stars. He was into astrology, different things like that. Julian of Norwich, we'll talk about her, and I'll show you some pictures of her in a second. She was another one who wanted to evoke these religious visions, and in order for her to do that, she locked herself into a stone room in a church, which you can actually go and visit today, that only had one little square opening for people to bring her food. That's it. So if you think about that, for years, she's confined to this stone room with a bucket to go to the bathroom and food delivered probably once a day. And she wrote an entire book about it. So I have a copy of that too on my shelf. It's a really interesting read, but she had all of these, visions. She thought that she was speaking to God. Maybe she was, who knows? We'll never know. But that's what she believed, and that's what she wrote about. So that's how she was able to evoke those visions. And then John Mandeville. Students always love John Mandeville. He was a traveler, and he wrote about traveling to all these different parts of the kind of countryside and area in England that no one else had been to before. When he did that, he was also artistic and would compose these beautiful, weird illustrations of these things that he would see while he was traveling. And people to this day think that what he drew was true and that he actually saw these things. He saw people that didn't have heads, but their heads were in their torso. He saw people with like one leg and one foot together. He saw little like dwarf individuals that were, conjoined, that had two heads. He saw like walking and talking animals that were trading money. And what's interesting is that all of the depictions that he has were very realistic because of their background. So he was able to write about what the grass looked like, what the climate was like, what people ate, what type of vegetation was there, what people looked like. He was able to depict and draw things that exist today. It's like castles in the background and specific big, trees that were there that were very sought after and well known. He did that, and then he'd have these weird creatures in the front, and people were like, well, they must be true, right? That castle's real. These things must be real. So to this day, people think that his pictures are real. And I will show those to you guys in a second. I'll go back to the slide, so don't worry if you're not done. Well, real quick, this is Julian of Norwich's cell. They call it a cell, or chamber. So this is the actual church in real life if you ever wanted to go there and visit. I know you guys probably really want to. I do, but it's a real church, okay? It looks modern. You're like, there's no way that that's from over 1,000 years ago, but it's because they've updated it and they've tried to keep it in pretty good condition because so many people try and tour the place. This, up in this left-hand corner, is the room that she was in. So they added this little walkway for people, like I said, to tour it. And they added like a little, picture hanging, talking about what, she did in there, how long she was in there, whatever. But this little square, that was it. So that's the only connection or contact she had with the outside world. Now someone bringing her food every day. And they'd probably take her bucket and empty it out every so often. That was it. That stone room is where she lived for years, pretty much until she died. Here is like a little drawing of her. She's like, help me. Please get me out of here. But she's stuck in there nonetheless.
But she chose to go in.
Yes, she chose, like it was her choice. I mean, that takes a lot of conviction to force yourself to stay in a stone room for years. I mean, it's hard for me to stay in my bedroom for a long period of time. I can't imagine a stone room. So here's John Mandeville. Remember I told you he would eat some weird berries. So it's pretty questionable whether or not he was tripping or whether or not he actually saw these things. Like I said, there are people today all across the world that believe these drawings to be true. So I'll let you guys decide for yourselves. There were a lot of people in first period that said that they thought that these things were real. So there's a one example. There's another one. There you go. The legged foot thing. This is supposed to be a giant, I think. Um, Here's a close up of their faces. I think that one's a female. I'm just gonna go ahead and get that's a male. Sad. And then here's the walking, talking animals that are like, trading, and they're holding some money here. So pretty substantial. They even have shoes on, right? So take it for what you will, but these were the drawings of John Mandeville. So I'll let you guys just decide. Here's the little infant, the two-headed baby. I'll let you guys decide whether or not you believe those things to be true, but I'm telling you, some really smart people today think that they are. So to each his own. Okay, so some important works. Caedmon's Hymn and Dream of the Root are two of the most early pieces of literature that we have to this day. They were recorded and passed along actually on stones. There's like big stones that have these two stories or poems on them, and that's why we have them today. If they were on paper, they'd be long gone. And then Beowulf, another example. All three of those we read in Brit Lit. Everyone singing. The Song of Roland and the Nibelungenlied, and the Story of the Volsungs, those really all focus on Vikings. A lot of these people were really interested in the Vikings and their heroic stories, so a lot of them kind of reiterated the stories about them. The Divine Comedy is by Dante. We talked a little bit about him. The Canterbury Tales, of course, is by Geoffrey Chaucer. We have Romance of the Rose and Vita Nuova. Vita Nuova is one of my favorite works. It's also by Dante. The Showings of Julian of Norwich, that's where she talks about these, religious visions that she had locked up in that church. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is that really short book I just held up and showed to you guys. It's about a guy who cuts a head off of someone, and that person is able to still ride around on a green horse, and they end up trying to chase after him and kill dragons, and it's really awesome. La Morte de Arthur is the story about the death of King Arthur. And then Everyman. Everyman is a morality play. A lot of companies to this day still reenact Everyman. It's where all of the characters, their names are like their characteristical traits. So like we have someone named Kindness, we have someone named Greed, someone named Envy, and they all act like their name would show. And those, remember, are just snippets. I mean, I could put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of important works up there, but we don't have space, and I didn't want you guys to have to take a bunch of notes, so I just put down the, most important ones, the top ones. These are the ones that if you go anywhere, you go to college, these are the texts that you'll hear, okay? Canterbury Tales is probably the most popular one, the Divine Comedy, Beowulf. Those are common, texts that if you were to go to college and they would say, you'll now know. You'll now know what they are, you'll know what time period they come from, and you'll know a little bit about the time period. So I'll leave this up there for a few minutes. If you are done, you can go into Google Classroom and click on the classwork tab and hang out there for a second. Once everyone's done taking notes, we will move on to the actual story. She wouldn't sort of use that, took words out, so I was building. I didn't know. Yeah, if you know a video. All right, we are going to move on to the story. If you didn't quite get done with the notes, that's okay. Some people in first and second block didn't either. I'll put this up again at the end of the period when you guys have work time, so I promise it's not going away forever, just for right now. So I'll have you guys go to your classwork tab, per the usual, and then underneath that literary periods and movements notes that you just had open, you'll see the Nuns Freestyle PDF, so I'll have you open that, and don't cry, it's not as bad as it looks, I promise. I'll explain in a second. And then open up the Nuns Freestyle worksheet. So we'll talk about that first. And well, real quick, if you scroll down and you're having a little bit of an anxiety about what it looks like, I promise it's not actually this long. Okay, it took me an hour to read the entire thing to first and second block. So it'll take me even shorter to do it in here because I just did it like an hour ago. So it'll be a little bit quicker. But when you look at this, okay, notice how the top line is bold and the second line is not bold. We're only reading that second line. Okay, remember we talked about Middle English and what that looked like? So this Harvard individual translated the entire story, but left us with the Middle English text. So if you want to, for fun, you can look at these bolded lines, but all we're actually going to be reading are the non-bolded lines. So you'll skip a line every time. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So I'll exit out of that. You'll keep that open on your computer. Okay, so check out this anticipation guide. So when we are reading, you will be filling out this front page. You won't even get to the second page and you won't be able to answer any questions on the second page until we finish reading. So I'll go over everything with you and we'll talk about this second page and all of these 5 questions when we finish. But for now, all I want you to focus on is this front page. So the first thing that you're going to have to do in this box is write the character's defect or sin. So we have the 3 main characters, Chanticleer, Perla, and Fox. All you have to do for each one of those is write down what you think their major flaw is. Like what's wrong with this person? What is the issue with them? This next box is the what happened. So as we're reading, and I'll kind of point these out, this is where you're going to write down the main events of the story. So what's happening first, then what's the climax, what's the falling action, the very end, what's the resolution. Just has to be, bullet points. If you need to add more numbers, you can, but you should have at least 5. And then the lesson or lessons, there's actually 3 lessons that are learned at the end of the story. The whole point is for Geoffrey Chaucer to teach us as listeners a lesson. So you'll jot those down in this box. Does that make sense? That's all you have to do as we're reading. So I'll have you guys make sure that you have this open up on your computer while you have the PDF open, because the PDF is what you should be kind of focusing on as we read together. So, thinking about the story, The Canterbury Tales is a collection of 22 stories, all told by individuals who are traveling together. So imagine you guys are leaving here with a group of friends, a group of family members, and you're going to Lincoln to go to a football game. Okay, that's the end goal. On the way there, maybe you're listening to music, maybe you're telling stories, you're just having a good time, right? That is the essence behind the Canterbury Tales. There were 21 or 22 characters traveling together from London to Canterbury. That is the kind of gist of what was going on. So from London to Canterbury, we had all of these characters moving along, and on their journey, because remember they had to either walk or ride a horse. It took them about 2 weeks to get there. On their journey, they're all telling stories. So we have the Knight's Tale. he told the story. We have the wife of Bath's tale, she told the story. We have the nun's priest tale, the nun's priest told the story. Okay, does that make sense? So it's kind of a collection of short stories. We're only reading one of them. The actual book is about this big. The story that we're going to read is technically 24 pages, but it's not that long if you look at the link that I gave you. But just keep in mind, that's what they're doing. They're moving, they're traveling on a 2-week-long journey from London to Canterbury to go on like it's like a religious pilgrimage. They did it once a year. So you have a host and he's like, yeah, all right, I want you to start telling me your story. Oh, sweet, that was a great one. Okay, who's next? Yep, your turn. You're gonna tell me a story now. Oh, that sucked. That was a horrible story. That sucked. Let's hear from you. Okay, and that's the essence of how all of these stories are connected, because you have to keep in mind they're all traveling together. They're all telling one story, moving on, telling the next. So that's how the nun's priest tale will start. You'll be like, what are they talking about? Who's the monk? Who's the friar? Like, who are these people? And it's because that person just got done telling their story. The host is like, wow, that was really sad and depressing. We need something a little more exciting. Nun's priest, you haven't told a story yet. It's your turn. And then we start with the tale. So when you see like prologue, the tale, and the epilogue, the prologue is just kind of a way for the story to get brought into existence and to get moving along. So before we start, I'm going to have you guys do those 3 author facts about Geoffrey Chaucer. So you can do it on Google Docs. If you have paper with you, you can jot it down on paper. But you only need to write down 3 interesting facts about him, okay? And we're only going to share out 1 to the class. But they need to be interesting because you can't repeat something that someone else has already said, which should be okay in this class because there are, 7 of you? 8 of you? It shouldn't be that big of a deal. Last period there were 14 and we were all able to get through all of the facts without repeating one of them. So you just have to look up 3 on your own, make sure they're interesting, and make sure you're looking at Geoffrey Chaucer, the author, not the baseball player, and then write them down somewhere so you have them, and then in about 5-ish minutes, we'll go around and each of you will share one out to the class.
So they're just Googling.
Yep, you just Google it. All right, so we'll spend about 5-ish minutes doing that, and then we'll share them out.
Do they put their facts on a certain document or just
Anywhere, because you're not going to turn them in.
Okay.
It's just for.
Just however they might have cut and paste something on
Yep.
something?
Yep, that would work too. All right, does everybody have facts done? Anybody need more time? No? Anybody want to go first? No, you're gonna make me pick. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go here, and then we'll go to Samantha, and we'll swoop back, and then we'll go up here, and we'll go here, and easy. Okay, just make sure, I know you have masks on, so it's weird. Make sure you speak loud enough though for everybody to hear so that, remember, no one repeats something that someone else has already said. Yes, captured and held for ransom in the 100 Years' War.
He had a part-time government job collecting scrap metals were used and also
Had a lot of weird and odd jobs.
There's a crater on the far side of the moon going back there.
Good, crater on the far side of the moon. That's how, important he is. The part of the moon's named after him.
his gravestone became the center of the Poets' Corner.
Yes. Have you guys heard of the Poets' Corner Cemetery? No, maybe not. That's where the famous authors and literary people are buried. Well, a lot of them are buried, and he is kind of like the center, like the first person that was born there.
When Chaucer was alive, Latin and French were his primary languages. However, he sometimes employed Middle English.
Yes. Good. That's yeah. Oh, I did. I almost gave away one of the facts, but he's called something for a reason. And it's because he brought that language to life with his writing. So. Yeah.
Is I am not
Yeah, connections to the royal family. Top dog.
Yeah, 4 children.
Yes. He did have 4 children. Did anybody read? Does anybody have another really interesting one they want to share? You're just itching, like you have to get it out. Did anybody read that he raped someone?
Yeah.
Yes. Back then, they considered rape. It's not what it's considered today. They actually call it kidnapping. That was another word for kidnapping. So he kidnapped someone back then. And that's why if you ever see that he raped someone, he didn't actually, well, we don't know, but he didn't actually rape someone. He kidnapped them. So that's interesting. And then he is known as the father of the English language because of what you said. He brought English to life through his writing. So even though he kind of grew up speaking Latin and French, and a lot of the things that he wrote were in those two languages. He wrote a lot in English because English was the language of the common people. That was the common language that everybody spoke, they considered them to be lowly people. The royal families, right? If you had people in your family that had money or you had money, you were able to get a tutor and you were able to learn all these cool languages. Geoffrey Chaucer knew that, so when he did a lot of his writing, he wrote in English because he wanted these common everyday people to be able to read and understand what he wrote. He didn't want just the royal families to read the Canterbury Tales. He wanted everybody to read it, and that's why a lot of what he wrote was in English because he wanted everybody to read it. So, good job on those. Oh, now you guys can open up those PDFs once again, or keep them open if you closed out of them. And we will move on to the reading. Couple of quick things that I want to mention. One, if you're frustrated because you don't understand what the heck's going on, it's okay. Remember, this was written like over 1,000 years ago. So for you to not understand it makes sense to me. Like that's normal, that's pretty common. So if you don't understand something, it's okay. I will go through and explain everything that needs to be explained. So if I don't stop and talk about something and you're like, what just happened? Don't worry about it, okay? Don't worry about it. Just worry about what we stop and talk about. And then once again, make sure you're filling out this chart on the front page as we read so that all you have to focus on when I give you word time are those 5 questions on the back. Remember, the prologue is basically the host saying, wow, that story was awful, let's move on to another one. So this first, 2 pages that we read of the prologue probably won't make sense to you, and that's okay. But just know that that's what's happening. He's telling the other person, I didn't like your story, I want something more entertaining, let's move on. And then the nun's priest's tale will actually begin. Woe, said the knight, good sir, no more of this. What you have said is quite enough indeed, and much more, for a little sadness is quite enough for many people, I guess. I say for myself it is a great distress when men have been in great wealth and ease to hear of their sudden fall, alas. And the contrary is joy and great comfort, and when a man has been in a poor condition and climbs up and becomes fortunate, and there remains in prosperity, such a thing is pleasing as it seems to me, and of such a thing it would be good to tell. Yeah, said our host, by St. Paul's bell. You say the very truth. This monk, he chatters noisily. He spoke of how fortune covered with a cloud I know not what, and also of a tragedy. Just now you heard, and by God no remedy is to bewail or lament. That which is done, and also it is a pain, as you have said, to hear of sadness. Sir monk, no more of this, as God may you bless. Your tale annoys all this company. Such talking is not worth a butterfly, for in it there is no pleasure nor amusement. So the monk's tale was depressing, and now they want to hear something else. Therefore, Sir Monk, Dan Pyers by your name, I pray y'all earnestly tell us something else, for truly were it not for the clinking of your bells that on your bridle hang on every side, by heaven's king, who for us had all died, I should before this have fallen down because of sleepiness, although the mud had never been so deep, then had your tale been told all in vain. For certainly, as these clerks say, where a man may have no hearers, it is no use to tell his opinion. And well I know the capacity of appreciation is in me, if anything shall be well told. Sir, say something about hunting, I do pray. Nay, said this monk, I have no desire to play. Now let another tell as I have told. Then spoke our host with rude speech and bold, and said unto the nun's priest straightway, Come near, thou priest, come hither, thou Sir John, tell us such thing as may our hearts gladden. Be happy, though thou ride upon a nag. What if thy horse be both poor and lean? If he will serve thee, care not a bean. See that thy heart be merry evermore. Yes, indeed, sir, said he. Yes, indeed, host, as I may I prosper, unless I be merry, indeed I will be blamed. And right away his tale he has begun, and thus he said unto us, every one, this sweet priest, this goodly man, Sir John. So if you're lost in the sauce, it's okay. We're moving on. This is the actual story, so forget what you just heard. Now the nun's priest is going to tell his tale about Chanticleer, Pertolote, and the fox. And I'm just going to say it right now because it's always this big elephant in the room. It's just like snickering. Chanticleer is referred to as a cock. Back then, in the medieval period, that's just another word for rooster. So when you hear that word many times, It's okay to laugh, but just so you know, that's why that word is used so much, and it says it at the top. Here beginneth the nun's priest tale of the cock and hen, Chanticleer and Pertolo. So there's your rooster, your hen, and then your chickens, right? Yeah, I don't really know. But I know that there are 3 different distinctions, and I know that the roosters are the males, and then the hens are the females. So rooster, cock, Chanticleer, hen, Pertolo. Make sense? Okay. Alrighty. A poor widow, somewhat advanced in age, was once dwelling in a small cottage beside a grove, standing in a dale. This widow, of whom I tell you my tale, since that same day that she was last a wife, in patience led a very simple life, for little was her possessions and her income. By husbandry of such as God sent her, she provided for herself and also her 2 daughters. She had 3 large sows and no more, 3 cows, and also a sheep that is called Molly. Full suity was her bedchamber and also her hall, in which she ate very many a scanty meal. She needed not a bit of spicy sauce, no dainty morsel passed through her throat. Her diet was such as her form produced. Overeating never made her sick. Moderate diet was all her medical treatment, and exercise and a contented heart. The gout not at all prevented her from dancing, and approximately harmed not her head. No wine she drank, neither white nor red. Her board was provided mostly with white and black, milk and dark bread, in which she found no lack, broiled bacon, and sometimes an egg or 2, for she, as it were, a sort of dairy woman. She had a yard enclosed all around, with sticks and a dry ditch outside it, in which she had a cock called Chanticleer. So we have to set a setting, right, for the start of the story. So the setting, we know from reading that first page, is a farmhouse, okay? So you have a lady, an older lady, and her 2 daughters living in the farmhouse. That's the only time that you're going to hear about them. We don't hear about them again until the very, very end of the story. So we can kind of forget about those guys, but it's just a way for the nun's priest to set the setting. So you have a farmhouse, and adjacent to it, you have all of these farm animals, and that's where these 3 people, or not people, characters are going to come into play. So we're talking about Chanticleer here. This will kind of, we're starting to get into one of his defects right away. In all the land there was not his peer in crowing. His voice was merrier than the merry organ that goes in the church on mass days. Well, more accurate was his crowing in his lodge than as a clock or an abbey timepiece. By nature, he knew the hour of each ascension of the celestial equator in that same town. For when degrees 15 were ascended, then he crowed so that it could not be improved. So like his cock-a-doodle-doo, right? His comb was redder than fine coral and notched with battlements as if it were a castle wall. His bill was black, and it shone like the jet stone, like azure were his legs and his toes, his nails whiter than the lily flower, and like the British globe was his color. So, Chanticleer is very, what, by all these descriptions of him? What would you say? What are they talking about his appearance? Are they saying is it really good, really bad? Good, right? They're saying that he is top notch, okay? He has the best voice of every animal on the farm. He has the prettiest coat and feathers of every animal on the farm. He's the smartest of every animal on the farm. So that's leading into one of his defects. He's hot, and he's hot stuff, and he knows it, all right? And that would be one of those defects you could put down in that first box. He definitely knows of his, attractiveness and his appearance. Because he's top dog, and because he knows it, he has a little bit of an ego problem, okay? That's a good way to sum it up. He has a big ego, right? And with that, this gentle cock had in his governance 7 hens to do all his pleasure, which were his sisters and his concubines, and wonderfully like him in their colors, of which the fairest colored on her throat was called Fair Demoiselle Pertelote. So not only is he hot stuff, but he also has 7 hot wives. All right, he's got 7 wives, all to him, no one else. The most attractive of the 7 is Pertolo. Good, right? She's top hen, he's top rooster. So they're kind of a match made in heaven. She's hot and she knows it. He's hot and he knows it. And that's kind of one of her issues as well. She's like, haha, I'm the best of all of his wives. I'm the most important. I'm the most, favored. And she definitely knows that. Courteous she was, discreet and gracious and companionable. She bore herself so fair since that same day she was 7 nights old, that truly she has in possession the heart of Chanticleer, locked in every limb completely. He loved her so that well was with him because of that. But such a joy it was to hear them sing, when the bright sun began to spring. In sweet accord my love has gone to the country, for in that same time as I have understood, beasts and birds could speak and sing. And so befell that in a dawning, as Chanticleer among all his wives sat on his perch that was in the hall, and next to him sat this fair Pertolote, this Chanticleer began to groan in his throat, as one that in his dream is deeply troubled. When Pertolote thus heard him roar, she said aghast, and said, Dear heart, what ails you to groan in this manner? You are a true sound sleeper. Fie for shame. So this is going to definitely be one of those plot points in your what happens box. This is what is going to get the entire story rolling. Right now we know that there are some animals that live on a farm. We know that Chanticleer and Pertolote are the top of each of their respective, species. But this is going to be the real game changer at the start of the story. All of a sudden, Chanticleer's sleeping, starts having a bad dream. He starts groaning, making all these weird noises. Pertolote's like, hey, wake up, what's going on? Like, you're normally a really good sleeper. What's going on? What is troubling you? And he answered and said thus, Madam, I pray you that you take it not amiss. By God, I dreamed I was in such mischief right now that yet my heart is grievously frightened. Now, God, said he, interpret my dream correctly and keep my body out of foul prison. I dreamed how I roamed up and down within our yard, where I saw a beast, was like a hound, and would have seized upon my body and would have had me dead. His color was between yellow and red, and tipped was his tail and both his ears with black, unlike the rest of his hair. His snout small with 2 glowing eyes. Yet for fear of his look I almost died. This caused my groaning, doubtless. So what animal did he see in his dream? The fox, right? So we can infer that this is probably going to happen. So he has a bad dream that in the middle of the day he's walking around the farm and all of a sudden a fox comes, basically snatches him, puts him in his mouth, and then runs off into the forest. So he's freaking out. He's like, oh my gosh, I just had this terrifying dream that I'm going to die. He's just really in kind of a bad mood at this point. And we're going to see how Pertolote reacts, and her reaction is going to be another one of her defects, okay? Shame, said she, fie on you, coward. Alas, said she, for by that God above, now have you lost my heart and all my love. I cannot love a coward by my faith. For certainly whatever any woman says, we all desire, if it might be, to have husbands hardy, wise, and generous, and secret. And no miser, nor no fool, nor him who is afraid of every weapon, nor any boaster by that God above. How dare you say, for shame unto your love, that anything might make you afraid? Have you no man's heart, and have a beard? Alas, and can you be frightened of dreams? Nothing, God knows, but foolishness is in dreams. So how does she react? How is she acting toward him? Yeah, she doesn't like it anymore. She's like, you're disgusting, you disgust me, I hate you, you're a coward, grow a beard. You should be, more manly than that. I can't believe you're afraid of a silly dream. Dreams are just foolish crap. So she basically puts him down, right? She's very judgmental, okay? That's one of her big issues. She's a very judgmental person. And when Chanticleer is really upset and is really needing, his wife to be, to be nice and kind of caring toward him, that's what you would expect, right? You'd expect her to be like, oh, it's okay, go back to sleep, don't worry about it. Instead, she's like, you're a loser, grow a beard, right? I hate you, I can't love you, you're not a man. Like, she's just totally reacting in the wrong way. So, on this next, page and a half, it's okay if you're lost. She basically just goes off on a tangent and talks about what things he should do in order to forget about his dream. She's like, eat these herbs and, take some laxatives and go out into the garden and mix these things together and you'll be fine. Right? That's what this page and a half is going to be about. Dreams are produced by overeating and often by stomach vapors and by the mixture of bodily humors when humors are too abundant in a person. Certainly this dream which you have dreamed tonight comes of the great superfluity of your red chloric humor indeed, which causes folk in their dreams to be afraid of arrows and of fire with red flames, of red beasts, fearing that they will bite them, of strife and of dogs, big and little. Right as the humor of melancholy causes very many a man in sleep to cry for fear of black bears or black bulls, or else black devils will take them. Of other humors could I tell also that cause many a man much woe in sleep, but I will pass over as lightly as I can. Lo Cato, who was so wise a man, said he not thus, attach no importance to dreams. Now, sir, said she, when we fly from the beams for God's love, take some laxative. Upon peril of my soul and of my life, I counsel you the best, I will not lie, that both of chlor and of melancholy you purge yourself, and so that you shall not delay, though in this town there is no apothecary, I shall myself guide you to herbs that shall be for your health and for your benefit. And in our yard I shall find those herbs, the which by nature have the power to purge you beneath and also above. Forget not this for God's own love. You are dominated by the chloric humor. Beware the sun when it is high in the sky, and do not find yourself with an excess of hot humors. And if there be an excess, I dare well bet 4 pence that you shall have a fever recurring every 3 days, or an ague that may be your death. A day or two you shall have digestives of worms before you take your laxatives of spurge laurel, centaury, fermentory, or else of hellebore that grows there, of spurge caper or ramus, of ground ivy growing in our yard where it is pleasant. Pick them up right as they grow and eat them in. Be merry, husband, for your father's kin. Dread no dream, I can say you no more. So, not only is she very judgmental, but she's also basically telling him that she thinks that he's having these bad dreams because he's sick. That's why she's like, take some laxatives, clear out your system, you'll be fine, right? And this is his response. Madam, said he, great thanks for your learning, but nonetheless, as touching Don Cato, that has wisdom such of great renown, though he commanded us to dread no dreams, by God, men may in old books read of many a man of more authority than Cato ever was, as I may prosper, who say all the reverse of this sentence, and have well found by experience that dreams are significations that folk endure in this present life. There need be no argument about this. The proof itself shows it in the deed. So, Chanticleer's response to that, to Pertolote, is, well, hey, wait a second. Do you know of all these people that talk about how you should really take into consideration dreams and think about what they say, think about what they show, because they all come true? And now, line 2984, we're going to hear a couple different examples of the ways in which Chanticleer knows that dreams have come true. So this first example is about 2 men traveling. The next one is about 2 men going out to sea. Okay, so these are just examples. So you can include that. That'll be on, in your what happens. You don't have to summarize each of these examples, but you do need to put them somewhere. So, Chanticleer giving examples of the way dreams have come true in the past, right? That would be an easy thing to put down there. So this is the first example that he's trying to use to persuade Pertolote to believe him. One of the greatest authors that men read says thus, that once 2 fellows went on pilgrimage with a very good intention, and it so happened they came into a town where there was such a gathering of people, and also such a scantiness of lodging, that they found not so much as one cottage in which they both might be lodged. Therefore they must of necessity for that night part company, and each of them goes to his hostelry and took his lodging as it would befall. So these 2 men traveling together, they get separated. One has to go to one, cottage, one has to go to another one. Though one of them was lodged in a stall far in a yard with an oxen of the plow. That other man was lodged well enough, as was his adventure or his fortune, which us governs all in common. And so it befell that long before it was day, this man dreamed in his bed where he lay, how his fellow began to call upon him, and said, Alas, for in an oxen's stall this night I shall be murdered where I lie. Now help me, dear brother, or I die. In all haste come to me, he said. So this one man is sleeping, right, and dreams that his friend, who's staying in a different cottage, comes to him in his sleep and is like, please help me. If you don't help me, I'm going to get murdered. Like, please come and help me. And this guy's like, whatever, I'm going back to bed, right? I'm tired. So he just kind of forgets about it. This man out of his sleep for fear awakened suddenly, but when he was wakened of his sleep, he turned himself and took no heed of this. He thought his dream was nothing but a fantasy. Thus, twice in his sleeping he dreamed, and at a third time yet his fellow came as it seemed to him and said, I am now slain. Behold my bloody wounds deep and wide. Arise up early in the morning time, and at the west gate of the town, he said, a car full of dung there shalt thou see, in which my body is hid very secretly. Have that same cart immediately seized. My gold caused my murder, to say the truth. And told him in full detail how he was slain with a very piteous face, pale of hue. So, He also dreams, finally, he keeps dreaming the same thing. Please help me, I'm gonna be murdered. Help me, help me, help me. And he's like, whatever, forget about it. Finally, in his last dream, his friend's like, I'm now dead, right? He's like dripping blood. He's like, I'm dead now. Tomorrow, when you wake up, go into town, you're gonna see a cart full of poop. And in that cart full of poop, it's gonna be my body. I was murdered because of my money. And that's the tale, right? And this guy wakes up and he's like, oh man, maybe I should have, tried to help my friend. So when he wakes up and trusts well his dream he found very true, for on the morrow, as soon as it was day, to his fellow's inn he took the way, and when he came to this oxen's stall, after his fellow he began to call. The innkeeper answered him straightway and said, Sir, your fellow is gone. As soon as it was day, he went out of town. This man began to fall in suspicion, remembering his dreams that he dreamed, and forth he goes, no longer would he delay, into the west gate of the town, and found a dung cart, which went as if it were to dung land, that was drawn up in the same manner as you have heard the dead man tell. And with a hearty heart he began to cry for vengeance and justice of this felony. My fellow is murdered this same night, and in the cart he lies gaping upright. I cry out on the officials, said he, who should guard and rule the city. Help, alas, here lies my fellow slain. What should I more unto this tale say? The people rushed out and cast the cart to ground, and in the middle of the dung they found the dead man who was just recently murdered. So, what do you know? The dream came true. So Chanticleer's like, see, Pertolot, like, if this guy would have listened to the man in his dream, would have paid attention, his friend would still be alive. So that's the first example that he uses to try and persuade Pertolot. And in a second, we're going to see a second one. O blissful God that art so just and true, lo, how thou always reveal murder. Murder will out, we see that day by day. Murder is so disgusting and abominable to God, who is so just and reasonable, that he will not suffer it to be hidden, though it may wait a year, 2 or 3. Murder will out, this is my conclusion. And immediately officials of that town have seized the carter and so painfully tortured him, and also the hostelers so grievously tortured, that they straightway acknowledged their wickedness and were hanged by the neckbone. Here, men may see that dreams are to be feared, and certainly in the same book I read, right in the next chapter after this, I do not lie as I may have joy or bliss. 2 men that would have passed over sea, think of S-E-A-C, for a certain reason into a far country, that the wind, if the wind had not been contrary, that made them tarry in a city that stood very merrily upon a haven side. But on a day toward the evening time, the wind began to change and blew exactly as they desired. Jolly and glad they went unto their rest, and they planned to sail very early the next day. But listen, to that one man befell a great marvel. But one of them, in sleeping as he lay, he dreamed a wondrous dream before the day. He thought a man stood by his bedside and commanded him that he should stay, and said to him thus, If thou travel tomorrow, thou shalt be drowned. My tale is at an end. He woke up and told his fellow what he dreamed, and prayed him to delay his voyage, for that day he prayed him to wait. His fellow that lay by his bedside began to laugh and vigorously scorn him, just like Pertolot, right? He's like, No dream, said he, may so frighten my heart that I will desist from doing my tasks. I set not a straw by, or put no value on thy dreams, for dreams are but fantasies and foolishness. Men dream all the time of owls and of apes, and of many a source of amazement indeed. Men dream of a thing that never was nor shall be. But since I see that thou will remain here, and thus willfully waste thy tide, God knows it makes me sorry, and have a good day. So, he tells his friend, hey, I had a dream that we shouldn't sail today, please wait, and the friend reacts just like Pertolot and is like, you're a loser, dreams are foolishness, don't listen to them, but since you're a coward, it's okay if you stay here, like I'm still gonna go. So, he did, and thus he took his leave and went his way. But before he had sailed half his course, I know not why, nor what mischance formed it, but by chance the ship's bottom broke open, and ship and man went under the water in sight of other ships beside it, that with them sailed on the same time. And therefore, fair Pertolot so dear, such old examples thou may learn that no man should be too heedless of dreams. For I say to thee, doubtless, that many a dream is very greatly to be feared. So that's second example. Okay, the next page-ish, page and a half, 2 pages. Next 2-ish pages are more examples, but they're not as like detailed as those 2 were. So you'll hear this and that and this and that, and that's just more of a kind of proof for Pertolot to try and be persuaded to believe Chanticleer. Lo, I read in the life of Saint Kenelm that was son of Knefelus, the noble king of Mercia, how Kenelm dreamed a thing, a little before he was murdered. On a day he saw his murder in his vision. His nurse completely explained to him his dream and ordered him to guard himself well from treason, but he was only 7 years old, and therefore he put little store in any dream, so holy was his heart. By God, I had rather than give my shirt than you had read this legend as I have. Don Bertolot, I say you truly, Macrobius, that wrote the vision in Africa of the worthy Scipio, affirms the value of dreams and says that they are warnings of things that men later see come to pass. And furthermore, I pray you, look well in the Old Testament concerning Daniel, if he held dreams to be any foolishness. Read also of Joseph, and there shall you see whether dreams are sometimes, I say not all, warnings of things that shall afterward befall. Consider the king of Egypt, Don Pharaoh, his baker and his butler also, whether or not they felt any effect in dreams. Whoever will seek out the histories of various nations may read many a wonderful thing about dreams. Lo, Croesus, who was king of Lydia, dreamed he not that he sat upon a tree, which signified he should be hanged? Lo, here Andromache, Hector's wife, that day Hector should lose his life, she dreamed on the same night before how the life of Hector should be lost, if that same day he went into battle. She warned him, but it might not avail. He went to fight nonetheless, but was slain straightway by Achilles. But that same tale is all too long to tell, and also it is nigh day, I may not delay. Shortly I say, as for a conclusion, that I shall have of this vision adversity, and I say furthermore that I put no store in laxatives, for they are poisonous, I know it well. I renounce them, I love them not at all. Now let us speak of mirth and stop all this, Madame Berthelot, as I may have bliss. Of one thing God has sent me a great favor, for when I see the beauty of your face, you are so scarlet red about your eyes, it makes all my dread die. For as surely as in the beginning woman is the ruin of man. Madam, the meaning of this Latin is, woman is man's joy and all his bliss. For when I feel at night your soft side, although I cannot on you ride, because of our perch is made so narrow, alas, I am so full of joy and of pleasure that I renounce both vision and dream. So, based on all of that, Chanticleer gives all these examples, and then he tells Berthelot, because he's looking at her, and Berthelot's still like this. She's like, I still don't really believe you. I still think that you're sick, and there's something wrong with you, and you're a big loser. So, he's like looking at her, and she's looking like that, so he finally is like, okay, I believe you, you're right, I'm wrong. I'm going to forget about my dream. You're so beautiful. I love you so much. That's it. That's kind of like the end of the conversation. So a little weird, but that's how things end off there. And now we're gonna see them kind of like make up, and now they're happy, and things are all back to normal. And then we'll see what happens in the next half of the story. And with that word he flew down from the beam, for it was day, and also all his hens. And with a cluck he began to call them, because he had found a seed which lay in the yard. Royal he was no longer afraid. He embraced Berthelot 20 times and copulated with her also as often before it was 6 a.m. He looks as if he were a grim lion, and on his toes he roams up and down. He deigned not to set his foot to ground. He clucks when he has found a seed, and then his wives all run to him. Thus Royal, as a prince, is in his hall. Leave I this Chanticleer in his feeding place, and after I will tell his adventure. So the nun's priest is pausing for a second. It's basically just letting us know that time is past. Okay, so Chanticleer has this bad dream. Berthelot makes fun of him, and just keep in mind that maybe a month or two have passed since he's had this dream. Make sense? Okay, I promise we're almost done. 8-ish pages left. That's not that bad. Out of 24, so we're way over halfway done. When the month in which the world began, which is called March, when God first made man, was complete, and past were also since March had gone 30 days and 2, befell that Chanticleer and all his pride, his 7 wives walking by his side, cast up his eyes to the bright sun, that in the sign of Taurus had run 20 degrees and 1, and somewhat more, and knew by nature and by none other knowledge that it was prime and proud with blissful boys. The sun, he said, has climbed up on heaven 40 degrees and 1, and more indeed. Madame Berthelot, to my world's bliss, listen to these blissful birds how they sing, and see the fresh flowers how they spring. My heart is full of revel and pleasure. But suddenly to him befell a sorrowful situation, for ever the latter end of joy is woe. God knows that worldly joy is soon gone, and if a rhetorician could fairly compose, he in a chronicle confidently could write it as a supremely important fact. Now every wise man, let him listen to me. The story is as true, I declare, as is the book of Lancelot of the Lake. which women hold in very great reverence. Now I will turn again to my subject matter. So back to the story. A fox, full of sly acuity, that in the grove had dwelt 3 years, by exalted imagination predestined that same night through the hedges broke into the yard where the handsome Chanticleer was accustomed, and also his wives, to repair. And in a bed of cabbages he lay quietly until it had passed 9 a.m. of the day, waiting his time on Chanticleer to fall, as habitually do all these homicides that ambush and lie to murder men. So, the fox has finally appeared. So we know that things are about to start rolling. You know, the essence of the story, the prediction, what he had in his dream, it's about to come true. O false murderer lurking in thy den, O Judas Iscariot, new Genlian, false deceiver, O Greek Sinon that brought all Troy completely to sorrow. O Chanticleer, cursed be that morning that thou flew from the beads into that yard. Thou were very well warned by thy dreams, that the same day was perilous to thee. But what God knows beforehand must by necessity be, according to the opinion of certain scholars. Take witness of him that is a thoroughly competent scholar, that in the university is a great disagreement in this matter and great disputation, and has been disputed by 100,000 men. But I cannot separate the valid and invalid arguments, as can the holy Dr. Augustine, or Boethius, or the Bishop Warden, whether God's worthy foreknowledge constrains me by need to do a thing. Need I call simple necessity, or else if free choice be granted to me to do that same thing or do it not, though God knew it before I was born, or if his knowledge constrains not at all but by conditional necessity. I will not have to do with such matter. My tale is of a cock, as you may hear, who took his counsel from his wife with sorrow to walk in the yard upon that morning, that he had dreamed that dream of which I told you. Women's counsels are often very fatal. Women's counsel brought us first to woe and made Adam to go from paradise, where he was very merry and well at ease. But because I know not to whom it might displease, if I would blame counsel of women, pass over, for I said it as a joke. Read authors where they treat of such matter, and what they say of women you may hear. These are the cock's words and not mine. I know no harm of any woman divine. Fair in the sand to bathe her merrily lies Perlote and all her sisters by her. In the sunshine and Chanticleer so noble sang more merrily than the mermaid in the sea. And so befell that as he cast his eye on a butterfly among the cabbages, he was aware of this fox that lay very low. Not at all then did he want to crow, but cried straightway, Cock, cock! And up he leapt as one that was frightened in his heart. For naturally a beast desires to flee from his natural opponent, if he may see it, though he never before had seen it with his eye. This Chanticleer, when he did upsee him, he would have fled, but that fox straightway said, Gentle sir, alas, where will you go? Are you afraid of me, who is your friend? Now certainly I would be worse than a fiend if I were to do you harm or villainy. I am not come to spy on your secrets, but truly the cause of my coming was only to hear how you sing. So what is the fox using here to try and talk to Chanticleer? Good. Yeah, he's trying to be his friend, right? He's like, hey, I just want to hear you sing. Why are you afraid of me? Where are you going? Like, come back. He's trying to persuade him. He's using flattery, right? He's like, oh, I heard you were a great singer. Come on back. Like, I want to be your friend. I want to hear you sing. And as we know, Chanticleer knows he's hot stuff, right? So if someone's feeding into that, usually if you have a big ego and someone's feeding into your ego, makes it even bigger, right? So the fox, using all of these flirty words and attractive speech towards Chanticleer, he's just gonna eat it right up. He's like, oh, you like the way that I sing? Well, I guess I'll stick around then. So the fox is saying, for truly you have as merry a voice as has any angel that is in heaven. Therewith you have in music more feeling than had Boethius or any that knows how to sing. My lord, your father, God bless his soul, and also your mother of her graciousness, have been in my house to my great pleasure, and certainly, sir, I would very eagerly please you. But insofar as men speak of singing, I will say, as I may well have use of my 2 eyes, except for you, I have never heard man so sing as did your father in the morning. Certainly it came from the heart, all that he sang. And to make his voice the more strong, he would so exert himself that with both his eyes he had to wink so loud he would cry, and stand on his tiptoes simultaneously, and stretch forth his neck long and small. And also he was of such sound judgment that there was no man in any region that might pass him in son or wisdom. I have well read in Dan Bernal the Ass, among his verses, how there was a cock, because a priest's son gave him a knock upon his leg when he was young and foolish. He made him lose his benefit. But certainly there is no comparison between the wisdom and discretion of your father and of his subtlety. Now sing, sir, for Saint Charity. Let's see, can you imitate your father? So the fox basically tells Chanticleer, yeah, when your father used to sing, he'd stand on his hind legs and he'd close his eyes and open his mouth really wide. And he's like, can you do the same thing? Okay. What does he want Chanticleer to do? Close his eyes, right? Because as soon as Chanticleer closes his eyes, the fox can basically latch on, bite him, and take him away. So Chanticleer, of course, falls for it. He falls for the flattery and began to beat his wings as one that could not epsy his treason. He was so ravished with his flattery. Alas, ye lords, many a false flatterer in your courts, and many a sycophant who please you well more by my faith, that he who says the truth unto you. Read Ecclesiastes about flattery. Beware, you lords, of their treachery. This Chanticleer stood high upon his toes, stretching his neck, and held his eyes closed, and began to crow loud for the occasion. And Dan Russell the fox leaped up at once, and grabbed Chanticleer by the throat, and carried him on his back toward the woods, for yet there was no one that pursued him. O destiny that may not be escaped, alas, that Chanticleer flew from the beams, alas, his wife took no heed of dreams, and on a Friday befell all this misfortune. So what do you know? His dream has come true. He's not dead yet, though. We have 2 pages left, but he's not dead yet. But he is being carried off into the woods by the fox. O Venus, who art goddess of pleasure, since this Chanticleer was thy servant, and in thy service did all his power, more for delight than to people the world, why wouldest thou allow him to die on thy day? O Goffred, dear supreme master, who when thy worthy King Richard was slain, by shot of an arrow, complained his death so grievously, why had I not now thy wisdom and thy learning to chide the Friday as you did? For on a Friday truly he was slain. Then would I show you how that I could complain for Chanticleer's dread and for his pain. So these are just more examples, like we should have listened, we should have listened, we should have listened. Certainly such cry or lamentation was ever made by ladies when Troy was won, and Pyrrhus when his drawn sword when he had seized King Priam by the beard and slain him, as the Aeneid tells us, and all the hens made in the yard, when they had seen the sight of Chanticleer. But supremely Dom Perlote shrieked, much louder than did Hasdrubal his wife, when her husband had lost his life and the Romans had burned Carthage. She was so full of torment and of rage that willfully into the fire she leapt, and burned herself with a steadfast heart. So what has Perlote just now done? Right, she's tried to commit suicide, okay? We don't know for sure if she's actually died yet, but she leapt into a fire, right? So she's trying to burn herself alive, right? She feels bad. She's like, oh, I should have listened to him. He was right. My bad. Jumps into a fire. Oh, woeful hens, exactly so you cried, as when Nero burned the city of Rome's senators' wives cried, because their husbands lost all their lives. Without guilt, this Nero had them slain. Now I will turn to my tale again. This poor widow and also her 2 daughters heard these hens cry and make woe, and out the doors they rushed anon, and see the fox go toward the grove. So now, remember, the old lady and her 2 daughters, they finally come back into the story, because literally we have a page and a half left. So she comes outside, her 2 daughters come outside because they see the fox run away with Chanticleer, and they're all going to be running after the fox and Chanticleer. So literally every animal on that farm is running. So this is a very, I guess, descriptive part of the story, something that you can envision. I mean, it's really easy to envision a bunch of farm animals running after a fox into a forest. And that's what I want you to picture right now as we're reading this. So they see the fox go toward the grove, and carried the cock away upon his back, and cried, help, help, alas, ha ha, the fox. And after him they ran, and also with the staves many another man. Ran Collier, dog, and Talbot, and Gerlin, and Malkin, with a distaff in her hand. Ran cow and calf, and also the very hogs, so frightened for the barking of the dogs, and shouting of the men and women also. They ran so hard that they thought their hearts would break. They yelled as fiends do in hell. The ducks cried as if men would them kill. The geese for fear flew over the trees. Out of the hive came the swarm of bees. So hideous was the noise, bless me. Certainly he, Jack Straw, and his company never made shouts half so shrill. When they would any Fleming kill, as that same day were made upon the fox. They brought trumpets of brass and of boxwood, a horn of bone, in which they blew and puffed. And with that they shrieked as they whooped. It seemed as if heaven should fall. Now, good men, I pray you all listen. Lo, how fortune turned suddenly, the hope and pride also of her enemy. This cock that lay upon the fox's back, and all his dread unto the fox he spoke and said, Sir, if I were you, yet should I say, as God may help me, turn again, all you proud churls, may a true pestilence fall upon you. Now I am come into the wood side, despite all you could do, the cock shall here remain. I will eat him in faith, and that right away. So, what is Chanticleer trying to get the fox to do? Talk to him, right? To let him go. He wants the fox to open his mouth, because where's Chanticleer right now? In his mouth, right? So Chanticleer's sitting there trying to figure out a way to escape, and he's like, well, the fox likes to do a lot of talking. He likes to flatter people. If I can use that against him and try and get him to let me go, then I can fly up into the tree and escape. And of course, Chanticleer was able to trick the fox. The fox answered, in faith it shall be done. And as he spoke that word, all suddenly this cock nimbly broke from his mouth, and high upon a tree he quickly flew. And when the fox saw that the cock was gone, alas, said he, O Chanticleer, alas, I have to you, said he, done offense. And as much as I made you afraid when I seized you and brought you out of the yard. But, sir, I did it with no wicked intention. Come down, and I shall tell you what I meant. I shall say the truth to you, as God may help me. So, as soon as the fox realizes that Chanticleer tricked him, he tries to trick Chanticleer again by using flattery one more time. He's like, well, it worked first time, maybe it'll work again. So he's like, come back, come down. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to be your friend. Like, I was taking you to my house, trying to trick him. But Chanticleer has learned his lesson. Nay, then, said he, I curse both of us too. At first I curse myself, both blood and bones, if thou trick me more often than once. Thou shalt no more through thy flattery make me sing and close my eyes. For he that closes his eyes when he should see, all willfully God let him never prosper. So what would you say based on reading that? What's one lesson that he learned? Or that we learned? What Chanticleer learned not to do? Right, not to close his eyes, not to trust someone who's using flattery, right? Never trust a flatterer. He also says, this is a second option for that lessons box. This is lesson number 2. For he that closes his eyes when he should see, God let him never prosper. So thinking back to his dream, right? If he would have just believed his dream in the first place and would have listened to what he was feeling, this probably would have never happened. So he's like, don't close your eyes to something that's right in front of you, right? Keep your eyes open, trust your gut. That's kind of a way to sum it up. Always trust your gut. Nay, said the fox, but God give him misfortune, who is so indiscreet of governance that he chatters when he should hold his peace. So the fox, and I'll give you guys this one, it's a little bit harder to interpret, but the fox's kind of lesson that he learns is that our greatest weakness can also be our greatest weapon, right? So even with Chanticleer, Chanticleer's greatest weakness was giving into flattery, and then he used that weakness, he used flattery in order to trick the fox. So our greatest weakness can also be our greatest strength. You guys have heard that. I mean, they say that in movies and books nowadays. So that's a common theme or common lesson that we even have today. Lo, such it is to be careless and negligent and trust on flattery. But you, who hold this tale of folly as of a fox or of a cock and hen, take the morality, good men. For St. Paul says that all is written for our instruction indeed. Take the fruit and let the chaff be still. Now, good God, if it be thy will, as says my Lord, make us all good men, and bring us to his high bliss. Amen. Here is ended the nun's priest's tale. So, we're not going to read that blog because we're not reading another story, so it doesn't really make sense. That's it. Usually it takes us 2 days to read this. Remember, I've never taught a 2.5 hour long class either. I know you guys have never sat in a 2.5 hour long class, but this is all new for me too, so I'm trying to not give you a crap ton of stuff so that you're bored. I never want you to be bored, but I'm trying, okay? I'm trying not to make it a long and a lot, but I'm also trying to make it so you're not sitting in here staring at the wall for hours on end. So, that was a lot. Let's take our typical break. We'll go outside for about 10 minutes. You can take your mask off, bring your phone. We'll just do one break and kind of combine them today since when you come back, you'll just have work time. So when we come back, we'll go over the worksheet, like those 5 questions on the second page, and then you'll have the rest of the period to work on getting those done because they're due before you leave here today. So you can grab your phones, head on out by Horton's room again, same old, same old. Hand sanitize on the way out. Is there a way to like pause this? I'll just go over the sheet.
Oh,
We're so here to be working.
Okay.
Okay, guys,
Did you
so
need this?
what? I'm gonna leave it until I get done.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna go over the sheet before I go to lunch so you guys know what you are going to be doing. So your front sheet should already be filled out, nice and pretty. The back side, the one thing I want to mention right away, even though there are only 5 questions, some of the questions have multiple parts to them. So if you guys want to look at number 3, just as an example real quick, number 3 has multiple parts to the question. So if you're only answering, right, like this very first question, why is Chanticleer concerned about dreams, you're going to get that question wrong, okay? You have to answer all points in order to get full credit for the question. Students always ask me, how can I get a level 4 on this assignment? Or how can I get above a 3? My answer would be, first, you have to answer all the questions. Second, you have to put a lot of thought and depth into your responses to all the questions, right? The above and beyond piece. And third, use text evidence. You guys have copies of the PDFs on your computer. You can copy and paste. You're using text evidence to support what you're saying. That's level 4 to me for something like this. Make sense? Yeah? So there it is. If you want a 4, that's what you need to do. So, number 1, what scenes or images from these tales most stick to your mind and why? So from the Nurse Priest tale, what I just read to you, what part were you able to actually envision happening? Was it the part where the guy's lying in a cart of poop? Was it the 2 fishermen that wanted to go out to sea? Was it all of the animals running after the fox and Chanticleer? What part was the most, visible to you and why? Number 2, what animals are the main characters and why might fables use animal characters so often instead of human ones? I love this question and it's my favorite one to read responses to every semester because students always come up with something different, something that I didn't know or I didn't think about, and I love that. This is an opinion question, so as long as you answer it and you put some thought into it, you'll get it correct, all right? Why do you think Geoffrey Chaucer used a fox, a hen, and a rooster instead of 3 people, right? Why? Why do you think he would do that? That's the question for number 2. Number 3, why is Chanticleer concerned about dreams? What advice does Pertolo give him when he voices his concerns? And what lessons can be inferred from her reaction and what follows? So first off, why is he so concerned? What's the basis behind his concern for his dream? Well, probably all those examples that he gave, right? He knows of all of these situations in the past where these dreams have come true. So there you go, I kind of just gave you the answer to that first part of the question. What advice does Pertolo give him? And then based on that, what can we infer from her reaction and what follows? So because of the way that she reacted, or because of, her reaction and the way that she reacted, what happens? What does he not do? What should he have done? Etc. Number 4, what happens to Chanticleer at the end? In what ways was he responsible for what happened? What moral is suggested by this ending? So that's pretty self-explanatory. That last part of the question, what moral is suggested by this ending, that's probably the hardest question and it should take you a little bit more time to think about. So when you're thinking about the lessons learned, right, what do you think is the most important one that they talk about at the end? And then last but not least, another kind of opinion question, number 5. If Chaucer were writing cautionary tales today, what subject might he write about and what lesson might he try to teach? So I'll give you an example, one that I hope that you do not use, but technology. That's an easy one that he might write about today. The reason behind it is because typically people are attached to their phones or their computers. I mean, I always have mine on me as well. I have a watch. Like, I get it because I'm in the same boat that you guys are. It's not just you. So Chaucer might write about why that's a bad thing, okay, and what you can do to try and get away from technology. Does that make sense? So you have to think of another topic that is going on right now or that, is bad right now that he might write about, whether it be education, politics, technology, any of those sort of things will work for number 5. You just have to sit there and kind of think about it for a second. Any questions on any of those? No? So you guys have the rest of the period to work on finishing that. When you're done, make sure you click the blue turn in button, okay? Before I let you work, I want to talk about what you're going to be doing tomorrow and Friday, okay? So remember to turn this in when you're done, and if you do finish, work on your pretest, because you have to get those done eventually. So when you finish this, work on your pretest for the day. But, real quick, tomorrow, this is what you're gonna be doing. So, if you go to Google Classroom and you scroll all the way to the bottom and click on View More, you're gonna see 3 different things, okay? One of them is due tomorrow at 2. The other one is due Friday at 2. So, tomorrow, wait till tomorrow to do this, you're doing this questionnaire about me. So all it is just asking me, or asking you a few things and kind of giving you a space to divulge some information about yourselves to us. So do you have anything that you want us to know about you? Do you have any like medical concerns that might, inhibit you to learn? Do you have any special interests for this class? Do you absolutely hate reading? Do you have any issues with reading or writing? Like, they're just little simple questions like that, and that's what you have to do tomorrow. I wanted to give you 2 full days to work on this poster project, so this should only take you about 5 minutes. But since we have to take attendance, you have to actually turn a physical thing into me in order for me to see that you are present tomorrow. That's why you have to do this. But in all reality, I want you to focus on the 1-pager project. So I'm not going to read through this in detail, but this is the instructions page. And remember, they used to do this on paper, so you're just doing it online instead, but it's the same thing. These are all of the things that you need to include on your digital poster. And the second page is a rubric. All right? So read through that, tells you exactly what to include. I even give you examples. And then there's a rubric. And then this link at the very bottom is the link to the digital poster. I have examples out in the hallway on my board, or on the wall out there, for the Nun's Priest's Tale. So if you finish with this worksheet, you want to go out and look at them, you're more than welcome to do that. They're right around the corner. You can kind of see how they did it on paper. You're just going to be doing it online. Does all that make sense?
And it goes right on here.
Yep, it goes right on there, and when you're done, you'll click the blue turn in button. But remember, this is not due until Friday. So I want you to work on it tomorrow, but don't turn it in until Friday. The questionnaire you have to turn in tomorrow, because I have to be able to see, and it'll tell me like the time that you guys all turned it in. Remember, it has to be turned in by 2 o'clock. That's my way to take attendance for you tomorrow. Make sense? Any questions? If you guys do have questions for any of it, just email me or send me a text on the remind. Some of you have already done that, and that's great. All right, so you have the rest of the period to work on your 5 questions, and when you're done with that, you should be working on your pretest, nothing else. So you're done with all of those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Forgot about those.
Get some of those out of the way.
Hands.
Oh, she has her own. What is that? Sanitize.
You wanna shut that off?
Oh, yeah, you just press the stop. Sorry. Thank you for
This one here.